Okay, good afternoon. Charles Moscowitz here. Thanks for joining me, everyone. And let's see, my guest is the author of Stealth War: How China Took Over While America's Elite Slept, that being General Robert Spalding. General Spalding is retired from the U.S. Air Force as a brigadier general after more than 25 years of service. He is a former China strategist for the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff and the Joint Staff at the Pentagon, as well as a senior defense official and defense attaché to China. He earned his doctorate in economics and mathematics from the University of Missouri. He is fluent in Mandarin. General Spalding, thanks for joining me this afternoon.
Thank you. Great to be here.
You have a good handle on what's going on with China, and I want to just do a little talk about some of the background on the emergence of the coronavirus in China. Conventional wisdom says that it has to do with these so-called wet markets and that practice. What do you know about that, and how did this whole thing get started?
Well, the reports I've read that discuss whether or not it might have been made in a lab or might not have been made in a lab actually have a lot of conjecture. The truth of the matter is we don't know where the virus came from, whether it came from a wet market or whether it came from deliberate manipulation by a researcher. The only way that we could find that out is by allowing CDC researchers to go to China, to go to Wuhan, the epicenter of the virus outbreak, go to the lab, interview the researchers, look at the work, and then also look at the area around and really try to ascertain through forensics the origin of the virus. And there's no chance that the Chinese Communist Party is going to allow that. So I don't think we're actually going to know how the virus came to be. And quite frankly, it's irrelevant now at this time because we have to contain it and we have to get this country back going.
Yeah, I mean, I think that it was quite striking that the Chinese refused to let the CDC go in with a team of experts and doctors to investigate as early as January, when they started to request that. And that to me was quite telling. And then, of course, now the virus has spread all over the world, and you have, we're literally changing the way we're conducting our lives at this point. Everybody's shut in and everybody's terrified for good reason, and they should be because it is a serious disease. But nevertheless, this is like an assault on the world, really, from China. Now, where are we now today with regard to the virus and how it's spread around the world?
Well, I think so. We've gotten a good handle on what we need to do, which is really social distance and slow social interaction, so that we can slow the spread of the disease in order to allow the medical personnel to deal with this. We don't want to swamp our medical facilities. That being said, this country is vastly different than a lot of the countries that have been hard hit, in that we have a very rural population interspersed with dense urban populations. So the dense urban populations really need to approach this a little bit differently because of the way the cities are situated and because people live so close together. The rest of the country doesn't need to take such drastic precautions. So I'm more concerned now about the economic devastation that's going to occur if we don't get this country back to work. There's a lot of fear going on, and that fear is you're seeing it play out in the market, and you're going to see it play out in job losses. And my concern is that we get Americans back to work. Certainly, places like New York and other dense metropolitan areas that face a crisis of an outbreak, they need to do work differently. But the rest of the country can get back to work.
Now, President Trump has talked about several possible drugs that have shown promise with regard to not necessarily curing, but maintaining coronavirus, one of them being hydrochloroquine, which apparently there's an Israeli drug company called Teva, which is going to be donating 10 million doses of this drug to the United States within the next week and a half to 2 weeks. And do you know anything about that? Is that proven to be in any way effective to cure the disease?
Yeah, it was part of a study conducted by a French physician, and it's seen great efficacy in eliminating the virus in the bodies of the people that it was administered to. in combination with azithromycin, which is an antibiotic. And so this is also being used currently in New York City as a standard of care for patients. I think one of the challenges we have with our medical system, we are in essence right now on a wartime footing. And so that means that we need to rush these kinds of things to patients if they're shown to be effective. And so rather than waiting on a double-blind randomized test to verify whether or not this works, I think the French went ahead and actually used it, and without a random test, saw the efficacy, and then are administering it accordingly. And I think we need to do the same. We can't run the FDA and the CDC on the same way that we run it while a global pandemic is actually being run. So, my opinion would be let's get this to the patients that need it, and it's shown efficacy, and see where we go from there.
I mean, it's a known drug. It's been around since the 1940s, dealing with various illnesses, including rheumatoid arthritis. So it's not like it's never been tried before. Can President Trump use the recently enacted emergency powers to make this happen, and maybe to sort of cut the red tape at the at these various health agencies to get this thing on the market?
He can. The Emergency Powers Act gives him, the War Powers Act gives him a wide latitude to use the powers of the federal government to provide for the American population. And I think this is clearly one of those times, particularly when you combine it with the information warfare being conducted by the Chinese Communist Party to deflect attention, both from the fact that, if they would have caught this or stopped this 3 weeks early, we save 95% of the global infections that are occurring right now. So by covering up and hiding it, and then trying to convince the world and their own population that it was actually released by the United States, you can understand that there's a number of things that have been documented in a report put out by two People's Liberation Army colonels in 1999 called Unrestricted Warfare. They talk about combining, bio warfare with information warfare and trade war. So discounting the fact that we don't know for sure that they released this as a bio warfare agent, but they're conducting information warfare and trade war because they're actually blocking the export of masks and other medical articles that are needed for our medical professionals here in the United States. So this is a big challenge, and we see now the true colors of the Chinese Communist Party coming through.
So then China is now blocking the import of American pharmaceuticals and medical supplies to the United States that they have and that they've produced?
Yes, there's anecdotal evidence that they're actually blocking the export of many things, particularly masks and other suits that are used by medical professionals. I don't know about pharmaceuticals yet, but they've basically hinted that could be possible.
That's outrageous. And I mean, we could talk about solutions in the future, like helping American domestic industry create our own medical modalities. But right now we're dealing with a crisis. Now, back in the 1980s, the Chernobyl disaster in Russia and the lies that were told by the communist regime there was greatly contributed to the collapse of the Soviet Union. Is there any possibility, do you think, that this disaster in China and the amount of toll that is taken on the Chinese people and the lies being told by the government trying to blame the United States, which is exactly what the old Soviet Union did with Chernobyl, do you think that might lead to a destabilization of the communist regime there?
I think the communist regime is currently facing many stressors. Unfortunately, in totalitarian countries, you never can predict when the tide might turn. Cuba has been the way it's been for several decades. North Korea, you see Iran, since 1979. So there's a lot of regimes around the world that tend to persist even in the face of economic calamity because the regime just protects itself even harder. And of course, the Chinese Communist Party has adopted many of the technologies of the West to create a surveillance state that's unparalleled in human history. So this is they're a formidable opponent. I think what's going to come out of this is something that you alluded to, which is we're going to reorient supply chains back to the United States and other democracies. Democracies are going to work together to trade and be connected fully, and we're going to be less connected and have less influence from the Chinese Communist Party and other totalitarian regimes in our midst and in the midst of other democracies. So I think with every cloud, there's a silver lining. The silver lining here is really being able to step away from the Chinese Communist Party. And when we do, they won't have the innovation, technology, talent, and the capital of the West to continue their oppression of the Chinese people. Will that lead to eventual democratization by putting pressure on the Chinese Communist Party? I believe it will, but predicting when that is just it's a fool's errand. And so we need to focus on us, protecting our own citizens, protecting our own country, rebuilding our industrial base and infrastructure, and then working with like-minded democracies to do the same and stop allowing the Chinese Communist Party to go through them to transship products into our country tariff-free, which is what they've been prone to do. So that's why each of these negotiations on bilateral trade and economics and finance and information is so important. And finally, we need to protect Americans' data, because right now the internet is a huge source of influence that China and Russia and other nations are using to basically diminish our social support for democratic principles and free trade. So this is an important aspect of the competition that, quite frankly, we have been very slow to adopt.
I mean, I've been hearing about China involving itself in, as you say, technology control through social media, into the degree that the average Chinese now gets apparently a score of some sort, a social score. And if they criticize the government or if they do something that's not politically correct, they can be restricted in terms of what they can do. And worse, I mean, as in the case of the Uyghurs, I mean, they can end up being put in massive concentration camps. This is something that, I mean, I'm thinking again of Reagan's defeat of the Soviet Union. One of the things he did was he started to contrast their system with ours and with the West. And he began to, he funded Voice of America, and he began to show the Russian people the truth about their own situation, and that helped wake them up. Do you think that we can counterattack in that way this Chinese propaganda and this massive technological control that they're developing?
Yeah, and in fact, we dismantled a lot of those pieces of our arsenal after the end of the Cold War. We got rid of the U.S. Information Agency, for example, that was responsible for independent public diplomacy, supporting, democratic principles like, the U.S. Constitution, and providing those insights for the populations of the former Soviet Union. So leaders like Lech Walesa when they came to the United States, they visited the Voice of America to thank them for the amount of hope that they provided the population while they were essentially under totalitarian rule. So this is absolutely correct. This is what the United States needs to do. Reagan vastly increased the amount of money, billions. He poured billions into public diplomacy and really spreading the message of what America is to the people of the former Soviet Union. We need to do the same thing with the people of China, the people of Russia, the people of Iran, the people of North Korea. We should not stop promoting the universal values that we believe in. This is how we basically win back this information warfare that we've essentially been absent in for the last 30 years.
Right. And also, I think it was Congress Senator from Florida who recently called, and the governor who arranged for a law to call back the Peace Corps from China, which to me, it seems like somewhat of a mistake, since that's a good American ambassador organization in China. What do you think of that?
Well, I think we need to find effective ways to reach out to the people. What the Chinese Communist Party does is control those interactions in ways that benefit their message. And so we need to find ways that get through the Chinese Communist Party controls and actually allow our message to go through. Now, there's ways to do that. One way is shortwave broadcasting. So there's still a lot of
Right.
AM radios being used in China. We got out of that business again after the end of the Cold War. We need to go back to spend more money in that. There's ways to get through the firewall to send the message. We need to spend more money on that. There's plenty of technologies that have been adopted to do that. We've spent more money on bombs and bullets than we have on information. And really in this type of campaign, particularly in a globalized world where you have a global internet, but they've created a giant firewall around theirs. We need to think about how we get our message into their country, because they have built that firewall to protect their population from democratic principles, but at the same time, they use it as a bastion to pummel our own societies with socialist and communist principles. So it's something that we have to really wake up to and start to fight back in the information domain in ways that you bring up the Reagan administration. They really put a lot of money and effort into doing this, and I've spoken to a lot of these folks that were in the Reagan administration working on that, and we've dismantled it all, and we've been very hesitant to bring it back, even though we can see now how powerful the Russian and Chinese propaganda apparatus is.
Okay, my guest is General Robert Spalding from the Hudson Institute. General Spalding, I think that it's safe to say that whether it was deliberate or not, the coronavirus can be viewed as a weapon against not just the United States, but all the Western democracies. And I wonder, first of all, we could look back in history and criticize both this president and this Congress for not properly preparing for this. I wonder if President Trump did the right thing by disbanding the pandemic task force. I guess that was done by John Bolton, National Security Advisor. Probably a mistake, but rather than maybe pick the past, what can our government and our Congress do now, both to kind of get through this as quickly as possible and prepare in the future for any such event again, so that it doesn't happen again?
Yeah, I think you make a good point. We always get into this, who done it when we have a calamity. The bottom line is both parties have been, essentially asleep at the wheel. We've known that this is a potential for a big disaster, including an economic disaster, for a long time, but we've really paid it little attention unless it rears its ugly head. Hopefully now this will lead to reforms. But I think what we need to do is recognize that in a globalized, internet-connected world, it actually is important to have borders, where the borders are controlled, where you can actually secure your population from whether it be, unfair trade or counterfeit products, or whether it be a pandemic virus. And so it's really reinforcing how important it is to go back to first principles. What were we founded under? Free trade, democratic principles, rule of law, civil liberties, human rights. These are the things that America stands for, and we've gotten out of those, out of promoting those and actually protecting those principles, because the world's changed. We built this great $800 billion military, but it's really focused on kind of a 20th century worldview, which is around geography, when oil was a strategic resource. The strategic resource of the modern economy is data, and data drives artificial intelligence and machine learning. And this data flows across borders very easily. And so, as we've moved from an industrial economy to an information economy, America has dominated that global information economy. China's attempting now to take that by building out 5G, by dominating the data of the world. And Kai-Fu Lee, their leading artificial intelligence researcher, says that China aims to be the Saudi Arabia of data for the world. This is a challenge when this is a totalitarian regime that uses this for economic dominance and influence. And so it's something that we need to be more aware of. We need to protect Americans' data. It should be as important as it is protecting the skies over their head. And this is something we've been very slow to adopt, whether you're a Republican or a Democrat. We've all been culpable.
Well, it seems like data, economic or otherwise, could be viewed as part of the sovereignty of a nation, and to protect the propriety of that is a technology that needs to be developed. I also think that perhaps this crisis has awakened people to the importance and the democratic principles that are behind national sovereignty. I mean, it took Europe, the European Union, only until a few days ago to finally wake up and realize that they had to secure their border. This is after hundreds of people are dead in Italy. So, I mean, the world is a little slow to recognize the importance of this. I think that Trump did recognize it early on, so should be given credit for that. But nevertheless, it's a lesson that can be learned. Yeah.
Well, I was just going to say, Winston Churchill came through on a trip to the United States in the very beginning of the Cold War and gave the Iron Curtain speech actually in the middle of America. He gave it in St. Louis. So, I mean,
right.
there is precedence for us awakening to a growing threat in our midst. At that time, the challenge was nuclear weapons. Today, it's really about data and artificial intelligence and the connectivity that we're increasingly being surrounded and engulfed by.
All right, General Spalding, you are the author of Stealth War: How China Took Over While America's Elite Slept, available at Amazon.com. Would you like my listeners and viewers to have any additional information about you and websites, anything you'd like to give out?
Yeah, they can follow me on Twitter at Robert_Spalding. I'm on Instagram and YouTube, General Spalding, and then I also have a website called armchaireconomist.io and soon to be stealth-war.com. So looking forward to continuing to interact with your audience and talking about the Chinese Communist Party.
Thank you, General Spalding. It's been a pleasure and an honor to talk to you today. I hope to follow up at some point in a couple of weeks and see if there's any new developments, and stay safe to you and your family.
Thank you.
Thank you.